The question I have for you is he already the best G5 running back of all time? I mean, you got like LaDainian Tomlinson, you got Marshall Faulk, you got Travis Prentice from Miami, Ohio.
They think Clemson sucks, A, because Dabo's an ass, and B, because Clemson got whooped by Georgia. Everybody gets crushed by Georgia.
I'm going to put this very plainly. This team is dudeless. They are dogless. They are a shell of what they once were.
I assumed, because I know when he loses, he likes to call his wife ugly. So I assumed he was going to say that the best part was he got away from his wife for a few days.
The Big Bets on Campus podcast.
All right, here we go.
Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. This is the Group of Five Deep Dive. I'm your host, Mike Calbers, joined by my sturdy, always present, always on top of things co-host, Mike Iannello. If you could only hear the after hours, the pre-show, all the conversations, we're trying to jam as much as we can into the next 35 minutes, but there's plenty of overflow. We have plenty of topics we want to discuss, so please keep hitting us up on social as well as our reviews and comments, everything that stirs that conversation, something that we, internally are dealing with, but also just we love the sport. And I think the reason why I feel this way is what a great week to be in the G5 seat. NIU becoming the first MAC school to beat a top 5 AP team. Just a phenomenal experience. What were your thoughts, takeaways from that game? They mucked it up just like a MAC team wants to, and they get out of South Bend under the watchful eyes of Touchdown Jesus with a victory. And man, what a moment.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was such a cool moment for the MAC. Listening to Thomas Hammock after that game, crying and having it be a guy that obviously he played there, legendary running back for that school, like how much that program means to him. This is one of those things where, people will talk about it for decades to come. Like, remember when we went into South Bend, you think about the App State beating Michigan, like this game will live on forever. And that doesn't happen often. And when it does, it is so cool. And every year you hear these pessimistic people talk about NIL and the transfer portal, and it's going to kill the sport and it's going to, ruin parity. And it's like, nothing's going to ruin the parity of 18-year-old kids. Like, they do stupid shit any given day. I don't think this stuff's ever going to change no matter what you do to the sport. That's why it's the best. It was an awesome weekend.
To keep up with the recap from week 2, Ashton, Jeanty, just straight God mode. He almost put the Broncos on his back and willed them to a win over Oregon in Eugene at Outson. 192 on the grounds, multiple touchdowns. He was bouncing off people. He was basically made the Oregon defense and all of their blue chip athletes look just as good as or bad, depending on how you want to phrase it, as the Georgia Southern defense. So the question I have for you is he already the best G5 running back of all time? I mean, you got like LaDainian Tomlinson, you got Marshall Faulk, you got Travis Prentice from Miami, Ohio, with all the records that he set. But at this point, I think it's just a conversation between Faulk, Tomlinson, and Jeanty.
Yeah, that's honestly a tough question. I would say, I didn't watch Faulk in college. I was too young. LT even was getting on. I was pretty young then too. So it's a hard debate. I think it'll be interesting to see if he can keep it up all year. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely going to play himself in that conversation. I think he has a legitimate chance to end up in New York if he keeps playing the way he does. And more importantly, that's, again, we talk about, I know you may have had many, many debates. One of the benefits to the expanded playoffs is Boise State will be relevant the whole year. Where the G5 tends to get cast off as the year goes on, it starts to, the playoffs, all anyone cares about. Well, if Boise State's in that mix, Jeanty will be national news. He will be a story. We talk about you have to be in the playoff mix to be considered. Well, now more teams are going to be considered, which means more players. I think Jeanty can play himself into New York, and I'm so excited to watch him do it.
2 more quick hitters. It kills me the injury designations or lack thereof in college. We just saw in the NFL Christian McCaffrey.
You were so pissed.
I mean, I was furious that they held the Gio Lopez injury info from me. It totally ruined one of my best bets of the entire week. I had it tied up in so many parlays. Hopefully, at some point, the schools can get together. There's no governing body. The NCAA is powerless. But I do think there's a movement, conference by conference, to start getting some NFL light injury probabilities questionable, something on the books, because it's ridiculous that something that critical can fly under the radar. And I'm somebody who's plugged in. I'm following all the college fantasy football beat writers as well. They were furious. And when they don't know and when they're blindsided, you really know that they kept it under their vest. And then finally, I just want to throw a quick shout out to Cam Fancher. Cam, I hope you play as long as Alan Bowman. I want you transferring after this year to another program, dragging down another offense, because the FAU Owls were a disaster against Army, my upset pick last week, and I'm not going to ruin my own thunder coming up, but I'm probably going to fade him again this week. All right, let's get into G5 Heroes. Who did you have coming out of week 2?
We may have an issue if we get to that segment, just FYI. But I'm going with Brian Blades, cornerback for FIU. I'm picking one, so I don't cheat like I did last year. But his pick 6 against Central Michigan was one of 5 interceptions for this FIU Panthers defense. One of the wildest stat differentials I've ever seen, where FIU was outgained by 60 yards and won by 36 points. I don't know that I've ever seen a team be outgained and win by 40. So just shout out to this FIU defense, absolutely creating havoc. Brian Blades with the pick 6. So I'm going to go with him as my G5 Hero of the Week. Calabrese, I assume you're going with Brian Vincent, so take it away.
That is correct. I'm going with Brian Vincent. I'll also throw out multiple game balls, maybe mini balls for the rest of the UL Monroe coaching staff. A double-digit underdog. They stuffed Trent Dilfer and his smug face into a locker. Second half shutout. The checkdown merchant Jacob Zeno, QBR of 22.2. But here was really the icing on the cake for me. Trent Dilfer's Monday presser, after the fact, he calms down a little bit. He talks about the road trip, losing to the Warhawks. Do you know what he highlighted as the only positive of the entire road trip for UAB? Logistics. They traveled efficiently. Like it was a corporate retreat. Like there was a bunch of boxed lunches and plenty of options for vegans and people with different allergies, and all the hotel key cards worked. All right, what are you talking about, Trent? Like you get paid so much money. You stole this job from Brian Vincent. He should be the rightful head coach of UAB. Even Joe Biden is like, man, you got to call it. You got to step down. You're hurting your constituents too much. This guy is ridiculous. To go from last year where they seemingly had a little momentum on offense and just their defense has fallen apart. Their offensive line can't block anybody up. They can't even complete the short passing game anymore. He is a lame duck. He is going to be out by the end of this year, and I'm thrilled. This was the kind of game to get it done, and I'm so proud of Monroe. They deserved it. They deserved to win like this. Also, a weird box score as well. It's not like they were putting up huge numbers, but they get it done in a laugher of a game as a double-digit dog. So Brian Vincent, G5 Hero of the Week.
I assumed, because I know when he loses, he likes to call his wife ugly. So I assumed he was going to say that the best part was he got away from his wife for a few days.
I mean, he did do a hit list of every single person, I think, like, quality control coach, offensive line, quarterback, and he just said, they stunk, we stunk. He went down the whole line. So he made sure to hit everybody on the way out of that one. All right, let's get into best bets for week 3. This is what people came for. I'm going to get started this week. I'm going to go with an over. Going to go over 69.5. North Texas at Texas Tech. First off, kudos to the Mean Green, 2-0 for just the third time since 1994. This is a fun team. They're going to be in shootouts all year long, and their passing game just looks fantastic now that they have Chandler Morris finally healthy. He's slinging it around. He's got a really nice receiving core. Just aesthetically and visually, a really fun team to go ahead and watch. But a quick PSA real quick here. There's been an under epidemic going on in G5 land through 2 weeks of the season, 2.5 if you sprinkle in some of those week 0 games. We are a hair below 60% on unders cashing. And I think a big part of that is a lot of these teams are shrinking games down. They're using the running clock rules. They're trying to limit possessions. Not these two teams. Because when I saw 69.5, my numbers had it at 76.5. So a touchdown differential here. And luckily in this spot, it's all based on tempo. These are two of the fastest offenses in the entire country. Tech snaps at just under 21 seconds per play, and North Texas isn't far behind. Their numbers got thrown off a little bit because they played Stephen F. Austin in their second game from the FCS ranks. So that was a game they didn't need to push down the accelerator. But if you look at their first game against South Alabama, they were really, going for it, pushing it into the red accelerator phase of their offense. So I think we know what we're going to get from that Mean Green offense. And they're also a live underdog in this spot because Tech is just banged up in such an incredible way to be entering week 3. They have 9 players on the 2 deep who are currently listed because they have an injury report. Kudos to the Big 12 as questionable. And that includes Taj Brooks, their star running back. Now, Tech, through 2 weeks, the worst Power 4 defense in the entire country. They're giving up 484 yards per game, and that included a game against an FCS opponent. So they can't stop the run. They can't stop the pass. They can't get to the quarterback. They can't do anything. And North Texas defensively allowed Gio Lopez in the first game of the season to set a school record for passing yards. So even if Brooks doesn't go, I think Morton's going to be able to turn to the skies and have this be an old-fashioned shootout. This is a game that, has a pretty decent, like a little bit of like rivalry angle in terms of the history of it. North Texas actually beat them as an FCS, a Division I AA school, back in the 80s. And I think ever since, this is one of those little brother looking up to big brother situations, and I think it's going to have some fun juice in this game. So I'm going to go over 69.5.
Yeah, I have North Texas written down as an over team as well. I agree. The Texas Tech, their front seven is an absolute disaster. So I agree with you. I think the Mean Green will be able to move the ball. I think I'd want Brooks to play. I think I would wait and see if he's in. Like you said, you do get the injury reports now. Maybe find a beat writer in Lubbock, turn some Twitter notifications on or something, see how he's practicing. But I think I'd want Brooks to play, but I definitely don't hate it at all. For my best bet, I am going with our beloved Rainbow Warriors of Hawaii, plus 4.5 against Sam Houston. Look, I was really high on Hawaii coming into the season. They are the only Mountain West team that I was high on, if you remember correctly from the preseason. I don't think I even mentioned another Mountain West team other than Hawaii. And I really like what I've seen from the Rainbow Warriors so far. They beat Delaware State pretty much with ease in a windstorm, so can't really take too much from that. And then they lost by 3 on a game-winning field goal against UCLA, a game that they played really well. The new defense under defensive coordinator Dennis Thurman has looked awesome. They allowed just 14 points and 16 points in their 2 games. They're allowing just 4.9 yards per play. The pass defense has looked terrific, especially, which is, that's Thurman's specialty, defensive backs coach with the Jets. They're allowing just a completion percentage of 53.7 this year. They picked off Gabbers twice in that game. They've racked up 10 PBUs in the back end, 17 TFLs up front. So really like what I've seen. I just don't have a ton of confidence in the Sam Houston offense. I know you were on him last week. Look, Hunter Watson was like, we talked about him. He was like a surprise entrant to the Royal Rumble that comes down the ramp hot, crowd's going nuts, gets the quick elimination. Crowd's hot for him. He's celebrating. And then the big show comes up behind him and just tosses him out of the ring because he looked lost against UCF. He threw 2 picks. He was benched in like the third quarter for Chase Bauer. And I don't know who's going to start this game. Bauer looked better, so I assume they honestly stick with him. But they cannot run the ball at all. They average just 3.2 yards per carry, which is actually an improvement from the 2.9 yards they averaged last year. So eat them up, cats. They're running a little better. But, Hawaii has a veteran quarterback, Braden Shager back. He is stud. Ashlock is such a stud. He's put up over 100 yards and a touchdown against UCLA. They're still figuring out the running back rotation a little bit. Landon Sims is back. They were working in Boston College, transfer Cam Barfield a lot more against UCLA. And UCF just torched the Bearcats on the ground. They had 6.7 yards per carry, 6 touchdowns. So, obviously Hawaii's not going to replicate that, but I think the Rainbow Warriors certainly have a better offense than Sam Houston. The defense has actually looked better so far this year. They're coming off a bye, which is a big advantage, especially since, they're traveling to the mainland. I'll be honest, I think Hawaii's a better team. So I think I win this game. So I'm certainly going to take 4.5 points. Go Warriors.
We talked about it in the preseason. This is the most fortuitous travel schedule for Hawaii to the mainland in years. When you look at their entire schedule this season in terms of when they're flying, the back-to-backs, the kind of body blow theory, whatever you want to get into in terms of how their schedule is laid out, it's ideal. And this is a spot that I had circled as well. We needed to see more on Sam Houston, see where they were in terms of their rebuild. Clearly, it's difficult at this point in the season. They looked great against Rice. Is UCF a top 4 team in the Big 12? Because if so, they should have, pushed Sam Houston into a locker, and they did. But if they're just like a 7-5 Power 4 team, then all of a sudden that win feels a little bit differently. But if I did have to pick a side, I'd be on the Bows here. I think it's a little too generous on the point spread. All right, for our G5 high 5 last week, I did 3 of the 5. This time you're up with 3 of the 5, so get us started in this segment.
Yeah. Speaking of getting shoved into a locker, give me App State minus 2.5 against East Carolina. Look, this line is an overreaction to the overreaction. Everybody watched Clemson just whoop App State, and they think Clemson sucks, A, because Dabo's an ass, and B, because Clemson got whooped by Georgia. Everybody gets crushed by Georgia. Like, I bet Clemson's win total as soon as that game was over because I knew it was an overreaction. And think about 2 years ago when Georgia crushed Oregon, who then went on to win 10 games. Like, Clemson's a very good team. Georgia's just better. So I haven't really changed my opinion on App State, if I'm being honest. They came into the season as a favorite to win the Sun Belt, and nothing they've done has changed that. I think Texas State's currently the betting favorite, and if you've upgraded Texas State, fine, but I don't think anyone should have downgraded App. They still put up 20 points and 5.2 yards per play against a very good Clemson defense. They averaged 5.5 yards per carry on the ground with Andrew Castle and Kanye Roberts. Joey Aguilar is still one of the best G5 quarterbacks around. He has 540 yards this year, 3 touchdowns, no picks, 3 stud receivers. Yeah, the App State defense obviously got torched by Clemson, but this East Carolina offense has 10 turnovers in 2 games. I'm sorry, but Jake Garcia stinks. He is way too careless with the football. He turns it over like it's his job. The Pirates have not run the ball well at all. The defense is still really good, and they were able to shut down Norfolk State and Old Dominion, but I think this is a step up in weight class here. I mean, think about it. Just, the Monarchs closed 1.5 point favorites against ECU last week, and now App State is only 2.5 point favorites. Like, I know, the game was in Old Dominion versus, in Greenville, and I love Greenfield, but home field advantage is not worth that much. So I think getting under a field goal here is crazy. I would probably make this line closer to 6. Colin Wilson has App State -8 on a neutral field with his power rating. So again, I love Greenville, but it is not worth 5.5 points. I think this is a big overreaction to Clemson just stomping out an inferior opponent. App State bounces back. I'll take him here under a field goal.
All right, you go from a team that you feel like you have your finger on the pulse of where they're at, kind of buying low, coming off of a loss. This is a team I've been very high on, talking about Texas State. The Bobcats, I got them at 16-1 in the preseason to make the college football playoff. And a quick note, I wrote it up in the New York Post. It was 80-1 for NIU to make the college football playoff before that upset at Notre Dame. They were hanging for about 36 hours. FanDuel, some other books, 80-1. So I went in and grabbed it. It's still 75, 60, 50-1 out in the market. That's just totally mispriced. And by the way, NIU has another opportunity for a Power 5 win, or Power 4 win, I should say, when they play NC State in a couple weeks. So there's more opportunities for them to even solidify themselves further in terms of a playoff resume for the committee. But as it relates to Texas State, Arizona State coming in, the rare Power 4 team going on the road for a midweek game. It doesn't get better than this for the Bobcats to be able to score a marquee victory. But I think this game has shootout written all over it. The total sitting at 59. I was a little bit shocked to see that. They're coming off a 49-10 whooping of UTSA, and their defense has improved, but I think underneath the hood, this is still a little bit closer to last year's Bobcats defense. And everything went perfect against the Roadrunners. They got ahead early. UTSA had to abandon the run, so they didn't really have an opportunity. They only truly ran it 23 times when you take out scrambles and sacks. That's not the recipe to beat the Bobcats. Who has the recipe, by the way? Arizona State and Cam Scatterbo. He's coming off a huge game against Mississippi State, 262 yards on 33 carries. He's going to run into this Bobcat front, which then takes their opportunities for havoc down. They had 9 tackles for loss against UTSA, 2 takeaways. So I think in this game, Arizona State knows exactly who they are. And by the way, coming into the year, I think there was legitimate questions about where they were in terms of this rebuild. They needed to replace 4 offensive linemen. Well, they looked beyond great against the Bulldogs in Mississippi State. 346 yards as a team on the ground, 6.1 yards per carry against an SEC defense. I think that's going to translate in this spot. And when I also look at Sam Leavitt, their quarterback, against Wyoming, when they did need him to pass, he went 14 for 22, 258, 2 scores. He's been really dangerous with his legs. I think that's the added element. They get into some read stuff with him, some quarterback, ISOs, some quarterback powers when they get that extra hat on a hat in the trenches. I think they're going to be able to move the ball consistently and finish drives critically. Nothing kills and over like settling for 3 inside of the red zone. I think they're going to overpower Texas State. I think this is a shootout. I think it's still a game that they can win, but I don't think there's an avenue for them to win unless it is high scoring and they use their tempo to try to mitigate some of their issues in the trenches. And then finally, despite it being a night game in San Marcos, it's going to be 90 degrees at kickoff. So I think these defenses are going to wilt. I think there's going to be a lot of scoring in the second half. Give me over 59.
Yeah, I think honestly last week was more about, I think UTSA might be a disaster. I think that's more, their offense is a mess. I think that was more of an indictment on them than it is necessarily the Bob's defense. So I actually like that one a lot. I will probably take that with you as well. Calabrese, it's Diego time. Give me Vanderbilt -10 against Georgia State. Look, Vanderbilt is basically running a glorified triple option, and it is the perfect scheme for a school like this, and our boy Diego runs it perfectly. He is completing 76% of his passes, 9.4 yards per attempt, super efficient. He's averaging 77.5 rushing yards per game. He is running this read option perfectly with Cedric Alexander. It honestly reminds me a lot of like the Grayson McCall coastal offense, and I think it just works really, really well. They are going to run all over this Georgia State front. They rank 112th in the country in stuff rate. The Panthers defense was terrible last year, and so far they're probably even worse this year. They allowed 500 yards and 7.8 yards per play to Georgia Tech, who basically runs the same offense as Vanderbilt. Like, we've seen this game. Just go watch Georgia Tech. That's what Vandy's going to do. They also just allowed 6 yards per play to Chattanooga last week. Probably should have lost that game. Chattanooga had a chance to win it late. You know, if you were worried about the hangover effect from the big Virginia Tech upset, well, Vandy drummed Alcorn State 55-0 last week, so I think they'll be fine. They're a week removed now. Like I said, Georgia Tech beat this Panthers team by 23 points and dominated them on offense. I expect the Doors to run the same game plan, win this by double digits. I don't think Georgia Tech and Vandy are all that different, power rating wise. So, yeah, give me our boy Diego against Georgia State. I think he's going to run all over this defense.
This is like the rom-com segment of our podcast. You can't quit Diego, and for, if we're being honest, I can't quit him either. But there's one player that I'm truly in love with this season for the opposite reason, because I want to fade him in every spot that I can. And I mentioned him at the top. Cam Fancher, I can't quit you, buddy. You, as a home favorite, you and your FAU Owls, you lose outright to Army. You get dominated on both sides of the ball. He threw it 37 times and carried it 4 times. So he had the ball in his hands with an opportunity to make plays over 40 times in that game. The end result, 203 total yards, an interception, 2 turnovers, and 4 punts. An interception, 2 turnovers on downs, and 4 punts in that game. The offense is awful. We know it. FAU is broken. There's nothing they can do with Cam Fancher as the starting quarterback. And the bigger issue, too, I know I want to keep heaping dirt on this guy, but there's no Larry McCammons on this team. There's no LaJohntay Westers. They're not walking through that door. I'm going to put this very plainly. This team is dudeless. They are dogless. They are a shell of what they once were. When you think back on the Lane Kiffin offenses, it wasn't even that long ago that this offense was fun. This is one of the least creative and boring and low ceiling offenses in the entire country. And here comes FIU catching 5.5, moving up I-95 for a quick drive off a 52-point performance in a blowout win over Central Michigan. They needed to get some wind in their sails. I know that if this game was at Pitbull Stadium, this would be bet of the year kind of time, but I think they're going to actually get a little bit of fans up there into Boca Raton, and I think there's a chance that this defense for FIU is their very best in at least 5 years. So, picking off Joe Labas 5 times, 6 takeaways in total, everything that they've done when you pair it with Kewan Jenkins, who expects to win because he was such a big winner in high school, I can't turn down the 5.5. I'm probably going to sprinkle a little bit on the money line here, but 5.5 to a lifeless FAU offense. Who's feeling comfortable laying that? Maybe you are. Maybe you can, play the other side of this, but I certainly can't. I'm going to fade Fancher until further notice.
No, actually, I am going to pass up the 5.5, and I'm going to talk about him in our next segment.
Okay, all right then. Well, why don't you close out the G5 high five here in week 3?
So look, I had to bet on our birth son, Diego. Now I'm going to fade our adopted son here. I'm going to take Washington -4 in the Apple Cup over Washington State. I know we adopted the long lost Pac-12 boys, but yeah, give me Washington here. I think, for starters, Washington has won this game in 9 of its last 11 years. And last year was the first game that was actually within single digits since 2010. So it's kind of hard to judge these teams this year so far, especially Washington. They played Weber State and Eastern Michigan, beat them by a combined score of 65-12. So they look good. Will Rogers is completing 79% of his passes this year, 5 touchdowns, no picks. I think he looks much better suited for this pro-style offense where, he doesn't have to throw the ball 50 times a game. And the new back in from Arizona with Jed Fish, Jonah Coleman, looks awesome. He's averaging 115 yards per game. And I know this is an entirely new team, but they're still very talented. Like, this Washington squad is still talented. They're still, I think, more talented than Washington State. And we saw the coaching job that Jed Fish did at Arizona last year. He is a very good coach, and an Arizona team, by the way, that beat Washington State 44-6 in Pullman. So they held the Cougars to 234 total yards of offense, and that was with Cam Ward. Coleman had 3 touchdowns, 6.5 yards per carry in that game. And John Mateer has looked fine at quarterback for the Cougars, but he is much more dangerous with his legs. He's kind of one-dimensional, and it's weird seeing Washington State average 36 rushing attempts per game. But, we mentioned it at the top. You mentioned it in your pick. Washington State looked great last week because Texas Tech is a joke. Their star running back didn't play, and their front seven is a mess. So I'm not putting a ton of stock into that. And again, I think Washington is the better team, and they love to run it up against the Cougars. I think Fish will want to make a statement in his first Apple Cup game in Seattle. Give me the Huskies -4.
Stop what you're doing right now and subscribe to the newest college sports YouTube channel.
College football is around the corner, and the new BBOC channel is your destination for betting on college sports.
Interviews with former college athletes and other topics such as college football 25.
Subscribe now and get in on the action.
All right, let's close things out with our underdog moneyline parlay. I believe in our picks the last 2 weeks, we went 3-1. We hit it in week 1. We came very close last week. I know I gave you some guff for going with Old Dominion, but they were right there. I mean, that's a game that absolutely could have won. Let's get started with your pick first before I get a little bit spicier than I've been in the first 2 weeks.
Like the Green Bay Power Sweep, baby. Just keep running the same damn play. Give me FIU. Let's keep on fading Cam Fancher. You said a lot. The FIU offense just has not done anything. They 3.9 yards per play, 2 offensive touchdowns, 3 turnovers, and the defense has also been bad. They're allowing 6 yards per play. We talked about Army, 7.2 yards per play, rushed for over 400 yards. FIU didn't do anything on offense against Indiana, sure, but they averaged 6.1 yards per play against Central Michigan last week. And as I mentioned with my hero, they didn't do much in the total yards department because they had 6 turnovers and short fields every drive. Guess who loves to turn the ball over? FAU. They still rushed for 5.5 carries, 5.5 yards per carry, 4 scores with their 3-headed running back monster of Owens, Lawrence, and Joseph. And I think Florida Atlantic is just going to continue to be a super high variance team with Fancher at quarterback because, sure, they're probably more talented top to bottom than FIU, but he can easily lose. They're probably close, but he can lose them this game. He can lose them a lot of games. In fact, we might keep running this play because, spoiler alert, FAU goes to Stores next week against UConn, who just beat Merrimack by 100. And then 2 weeks from now, they play North Texas in Boca. Ugh, if God forbid you hang North Texas as a dog there, guess what? They're going in the parlay as well. So yeah, you can take the 5.5. I'll take the money line. Give me the Panthers. Keep fading Cam Fancher.
All right, Friday night gambling alert. So if you want to get in this money line parlay, you got to get it in a day early because I'm going UNLV plus 220 on the money line over Kansas. Let's get started on the Kansas side. This is not the Kansas team of old under Kotelnicki. By the way, Kotelnicki, what he's done with Penn State's offense overnight, all of a sudden Drew Aller's pumping the ball downfield. They got people wide open in space. He's a genius. He's the reason why the Jayhawks were really, feisty last year. Whether it was their, Daniels at quarterback or their backup, in Bean, it didn't matter because his system won the day. He is gone. Jalen Daniels has already thrown 4 picks through 2 games. He clearly misses his play caller and offensive coordinator. He's struggling with accuracy. Overall, the Kansas offense has just looked sloppy. It was something that gave off the appearance of sophistication, but they ran their core elements of their offense like a Swiss watch. That is not them this year. That's how much the coaching change has affected them. 4 turnovers and a turnover on downs in Illinois' territory. That is the kind of thing where even if they start moving the ball and they hit some plays, not finishing drives and fumbling the bag and stubbing their toe in the opponent's side of the field, that is a recipe to get upset. Now here comes a revitalized UNLV defense. I talked about it with what Catalan brings to their secondary. They dominated Houston on the road. They were not afraid to play against a Power 4 team. They should have shut out the Cougars in that game. This is the same Houston team, by the way, that bounces back against Oklahoma, nearly upsets the Sooners in Norman. So it wasn't like they beat a team that was already, putting the white flag up. And then Sluka is exactly what I was hoping for and more. He is a boomer bust guy in the passing game. He's going to push the ball downfield. He's going to take risks. And if you do not put a spy on him, or if you try to, play too aggressively with slants or stunts in the run game. He's going to pull it. He's going to be at the backside of that offensive line, and he's going to get a huge chunk running play in this game. And once that goes, he's like one of those players that as soon as he gets a little bit of confidence, it just spreads across the entire offense. My only concern after the first week is putting out an APB for their wide receiver, their star. Please help me with his name. Ricky White. I couldn't even remember his name because he wasn't in the box score from the first week. Well, here he is bouncing back, 5 catches, 3 touchdowns against Utah Tech, who, switched from Dixie State. Pretty good rebranding for Utah Tech, but they're awful. It was just basically a glorified preseason game for them. But getting White back involved in the passing game assures me that Sluka understands who the alpha dog is in that receiving room, because he needs to have a big game for them to upset Kansas on the road. I think he's going to get it done. I also am a huge believer, as I've been saying it for years, in Brennan Marion. He is going to get creative. Haj Malik Williams already had carries in the last game. I think he had over 60 yards rushing. Jaden Thomas hasn't even really been used yet. He's a Ferrari just waiting in the garage. You got to get him going. I think this is the coming out party for the offense. Sluka needed a little confidence. They're brimming with it coming into this game. I mentioned it in the preseasons, why UNLV over on their win total, I was so bullish, why I had them in the Mountain West title game against Boise, why I bought them last week at 22-1 to make the college football playoff, still at there at 15-1. I still think that's a good value. This team believes in themselves, and they had 3 Power 4 opportunities. Houston, green check mark. Here comes Kansas, and then Syracuse in a few more weeks. They got to go 2-1 in this stretch. I think they get this win over the Jayhawks.
And it's not one of those weird games that it's going to be played in like a soccer field in Kansas City. So certainly not much home field advantage for the Jayhawks in this one.
So do you like it? Are you putting the stamp of approval? I mean, both of us are in that. I think you're close to 2-1 as well. This is going to be quite the spicy payday if they go ahead and hit.
I don't like it. I actually bet Kansas, but I think these two teams are very high variance, very boomer bust, very go for broke on both sides of the ball. So if I was going to play UNLV, I'd rather take the money line than the points. So from that aspect, I don't hate it because, like you said, I think Daniels especially is uber talented, but has been careless with the football. The new offense has not clicked the way the old offense does. I still love Lance Leipold as a coach. I think they bounced back off the Illinois loss. So I think this is one of those games where Kansas, if they click, they win by 10. If Daniels is careless with the ball and UNLV hits big plays, then UNLV wins the game. So I did bet Kansas on the spread, but I don't hate the money line play on UNLV.
Just a programming note, as always, Colin and Stuck will be handling the full card. That's next on your podcast feed. You can also get some of that episode live over on our YouTube channel at BBOC. So make sure to subscribe so you get those updates and alerts when we're about to go live. Saturday, as always, the live show, Brett McMurphy, Colin Stuck, myself, also Johnny Manziel coming in with his weekly pick and Hail Mary pick. He hit Vandy in week 1. So you got to listen in to his insight. He's been doing some really interesting interviews with Colin and Stuck throughout the week as well. So you can find all of those goodies over at the BBOC YouTube channel, as well as our shorts. And a reminder as well for our audience members. As I've said many times over, 5-star reviews are incredibly helpful as we try to grow this brand, bring it to new audiences. So there's been lots of 5-star reviews piling in from eBids31, McCon23, Downs, I Train, and Run Phil Run. A special thank you for those Apple reviews. Email podcasts@actionnetwork.com to claim your prize. We're going to take care of you. Make sure you get some swag. And I'm going to take it a step further for Knock If You're With Me. Great username, 5-star review as well. Just hit me up over at Twitter @EastBreeze. That's EASTBREESE. I got a free $10 college football parlay with your name on it. Or perhaps you want to get in on the NIU to make the college football party turn
or
$10
FIU UNLV money line.
There we go. There's lots of options waiting for you, so I'm knocking with you, bud. Go ahead and hit me up, slide into my DMs. For Mike Ainella, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the Group of 5 Deep Dive under the Big Bets on Campus banner. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to check out all of our content and be there on Saturday for our live show with Brett McMurphy, Colin Stuckey, and myself.